Hello, everyone. Welcome back to class. I hope you're doing well. This is week number 6. And just want to say, keep up the good work. What you're doing, this is a major undertaking, being a PhD student. And for many of you, working full time, working part time, working per diem, working in some capacity. Maybe you've got a busy family life, etc., etc. Being a PhD student is a major undertaking. Keep your eye on the ball, keep working hard. You're doing a good job in class. Please reach out if you have questions on material. Please reach out if you need to make any changes in due date. I'm here to help you reach success in this class. Now, are epidemiologists funny? You decide. Here is our material for this week. We've got a screencast or two. Usually I break this up into 2 screencasts. The first one will be about 20 minutes, and then the second part would be much shorter. Weeks 6 through 8, we're just going to be having basically homework assignments, multiple choice, maybe 5 or 6 questions. I would recommend downloading that file and doing your homework as you listen to this screencast. These next few weeks are not going to be introducing new material that is going to change how you design your projects. We've hit the major material for what most of us here would be using in our research. Unless you go on to get a master's in public health or a PhD in epidemiology, the main designs we talked about, these are going to be the key ones that you're going to be using. Now, these next few weeks, these are some kind of general concepts, lectures, and so just kind of giving an overview of some of the chapters from the book. This week, we're looking at chapter 5, causation in epidemiology. So the homework assignments are going to be these little multiple choice things. You want to be focusing on now and over the next few weeks, preparing your presentation and your poster assignments. We've been working through the term, as you've noticed, on kind of playing around with some different ideas, having you talk about different types of research you could do in your area, looking at risk factors, etc., etc. If you want, use those topics or that topic for your assignment. Your presentation, your poster, and your written paper at the end of the term can be all on the same topic. So now you want to build upon this. And this is where you're going to be doing that screencast. That's the presentation, which should be 10 minutes. Keep it tight to 10 minutes because that's what you would do for a platform presentation. And I gave an example of that earlier in the term related to my volleyball research. And then the poster is going to be turning in a PDF of a poster. Again, poster being another way that we disseminate research findings at professional conferences. So you're going to submit a PDF version of your poster to me. And both of those are due by November 6th. Okay, so here are the key messages for this week from Chapter 5, Causation in Epidemiology. If you want to read through these, go ahead and pause the recording. So I've shared examples from some of my research where I've looked at preseason presentation of strength, of agility, of different aspects of athletic performance in order to see if how somebody presents at the start of the season, if that increases their risk of injury. The thinking being if somebody is deconditioned, are they going to be more likely to get hurt? Well, what this chapter is talking about, it's talking about causation. What is the root cause of something? And many times there are multiple causes. Some injuries, some sports injuries, might have a mechanism that makes sense, an overuse type of injury from sprinting, something like that, or rolling an ankle, might have kind of a traumatic type of situation to it. But what if something is an overuse injury from repeatedly jumping? For those of you who aren't familiar with musculoskeletal injuries, patellar tendinopathy is an injury that's experienced by basketball and volleyball players. And the thinking is that as somebody repeatedly jumps, that puts excessive strain upon the patellar tendon. There's an abnormal healing response, and they develop patellar tendinopathy, that jumper's knee. Well, not everybody develops jumper's knee. There are many people, the vast majority, that don't. So why do some people? Maybe the cause is genetic. So this particular study here suggests that there's an epigenetic component at the MMP11 gene promoter. Epigenetics, that's the study of how behavior and environment can cause changes in the way that our genes work. Unlike genetic changes that result from mutation, epigenetic changes are reversible and do not change one's DNA sequence. They change, though, how your body reads a DNA sequence. The two most commonly studied epigenetic mechanisms that are most related to physical activity are DNA methylation, which is the addition of a methyl group to DNA, and histone acetylation, which is the addition of an acetyl group at one end of a histone molecule. If methylation occurs at the gene's promoter region or at an enhancer region, transcription of the gene into mRNA will be blocked. The result is a decreased production of the protein encoded by that portion of the gene. If methylation occurs beyond a promoter or enhancer region, researchers think that methylation enhances gene transcription. Thus, the result is increased production of the protein encoded by that portion of the gene. Researchers think that methylation may be involved in the etiology of disease. For example, methylation of PGC1 alpha promoter region is associated with reduced skeletal muscle mitochondrial content in individuals with type 2 diabetes. So, it's possible that individuals with this epigenetic status are at a greater risk for patellar tendinopathy. What has not been done on this topic, though? Two things. One, I would love to, if I could, if I had money and the knowledge or the ability to do this, collect genetic samples on 200 males or 200 females and determine if they have this epigenetic MMP11 gene promoter, and then put those people in the at-risk group and all the other basketball players in the reference or lesser risk group to see if those in the at-risk group go on to have a greater proportion of patellar tendinopathy. In other words, to see if there's a greater risk. Another thing you could potentially do is if you knew there were individuals that had this gene, could you do an intervention prior to the season? Let's say you had 100 people and you randomized them into one of two groups. One group got a specific training program, the other group didn't. Look to see if that helped to reduce the incidence of patellar tendinopathy throughout the season. Major focus of epidemiology is informing efforts to prevent and control disease and to promote health. In order to do this, we need to know causes of disease or injury and the ways in which these causes can be modified. An understanding of the causes of disease or injury is important not only for prevention, but also for correct diagnosis and treatment. The concept of cause is a source of controversy in epidemiology, though. The process by which we make causal inferences, judgments linking postulated causes and their outcomes, is a major theme of the general philosophy of science, and the concept of cause has different meanings in different contexts. Cause of a disease or injury is an event, condition, characteristic, or a combination of these factors which plays an important role in producing the health outcome. A cause must precede an outcome. A cause is termed sufficient when it inevitably produces or initiates an outcome. It's termed necessary if an outcome cannot develop in its absence. Some diseases are caused completely by genetic factors in the individual. Other causes of disease interact with genetic factors in making certain individuals more vulnerable than others. The term environmental causes is often used to distinguish these other causes from genetic causes. There is nearly always some genetic and some environmental component in every causal mechanism. A sufficient cause is not usually a single factor. Often it comprises several components. It is not always necessary to identify all the components of a sufficient cause before effective prevention can take place. This is key to the chapter. The removal of one component may interfere with the action of the others and thus prevent the disease or injury. For many of us, we may not be working in an environment, in a setting, which would allow us to determine the cause at a genetic level or the cause looking at some sort of pathogen. But we may be able to identify some other component that helps to prevent the disease or injury or helps to reduce the risk or improve the, I should say, helps to improve one's outcome. Cigarette smoking is a component of lung cancer. It's probably the biggest. We see a young picture of Keith Richards there and a more recent picture. Keith Richards of the Rolling Stones, known for his drug lifestyle, smoking being one of those. He's one of those individuals that has smoked a long time and has not, to our knowledge, developed lung cancer. So there's likely a combination of genetic and environmental factors. We do know, though, from looking at large populations, if one does stop smoking, the likelihood that one develops lung cancer is now extremely low. That brings us to attributable fraction. Attributable fraction can be used to quantify the likely preventative impact of eliminating a specific causal factor. So this is interesting here. This table shows the age-standardized lung cancer death rates in relation to tobacco use and occupational exposure to asbestos dust. So if somebody smoked and they were exposed to asbestos dust, out of 100,000, 602 lung cancer deaths occurred. But if somebody never smoked, there'd be a 90% reduction, a decrease. So only 58 per 100,000 would get lung cancer or have death from lung cancer. Never being exposed to asbestos but still smoking would have reduced the rate from 602 to 123. Each sufficient cause has a necessary cause as a component. In a study of an outbreak of foodborne infection, it may be found that chicken salad, that could be a sufficient cause of salmonella diarrhea. The ingestion, though, of the salmonella bacteria is the necessary cause of the disease. Another example here looking at sufficient and necessary. Somebody can be susceptible to infection. Malnourished, have genetic factors, live in crowded housing, be poor. These are risk factors for tuberculosis. It's necessary to be infected with the Mycobacterium tuberculosis, though, for somebody to develop the disease. Take away the poverty, the malnutrition, the crowded housing, somebody might be at a much lesser risk of being exposed to the bacteria. So that's where epidemiology could be powerful. Identifying those potential risk factors, even if you didn't know what was causing tuberculosis, identifying those risk factors, trying to address those risk factors could then reduce the rate of infection. The usual approach in epidemiology is to begin with a disease and search for its causes, although it is possible to start with a potential cause, such as air pollution, and search for its effects. Epidemiology encompasses a whole set of relationships. For example, social class is associated with a range of health problems. Low social class, as measured by income, education, housing, and occupation, leads to a general susceptibility to poor health rather to a specific effect. The gamut of specific causes of disease could explain why poor people have poor health. Among them, excessive exposure to infectious agents due to overcrowding, lack of clean water and sanitation, insufficient and unsafe food, and dangerous working conditions. In addition, being at the bottom of the social ladder is in itself associated with poor health, even after taking all the other factors into account. Epidemiologists have been criticized for not using the concept of cause in the sense of being the sole requirement for the production of disease. Such a view can be restrictive. It does not take into account the fact that diseases commonly have multiple causes. In addition, using that logic, if we go back to earlier in the term, John Snow back in the 1800s in London would have been focused on trying to find a bacterial cause of the cholera versus looking for the contaminated water supply. By finding that contaminated water supply, they were able then to reduce the deaths that were occurring. Prevention strategies often need to be directed simultaneously at more than one factor. In addition, causes can be linked to a causal pathway where one factor leads to another until eventually the specific pathogenic agent becomes present in the organ that gets damaged. This can also be called the hierarchy of causes. Lab scientists might, for example, suggest that the basic cause of coronary heart disease relates to cellular mechanisms involved in the proliferation of tissue in the arterial wall. Research directed at determining pathogenic relationships is important, but concepts of causation need to be understood in a wider epidemiologic context. It is often possible to make major progress in preventing by dealing only with the more remote or upstream causes. It was possible to prevent cholera cases decades before the responsible organism, let alone the mechanism of action, had been identified. However, it is of interest that even in 1854, John Snow thought that a living organism, was responsible for the disease. Again, here's showing the causes of cholera. We know that exposure to contaminated water would get the individual infected. But it's these genetic factors, these malnutrition factors, crowded housing, and poverty, which increase the potential exposure to the contaminated water, which then led to the infections. Fix these over here, you're reducing the rate of infection over here, and ultimately then people getting cholera and dying from it. Pasteur's work on microorganisms led to the formulation, first by Henle and then by Koch, of the following rules for determining whether a specific organism causes a particular disease. The organism must be present in every case of the disease. The organism must be able to be isolated and grown in pure culture. The organism must, when inoculated into a susceptible animal, cause the specific disease, and the organism must then be recovered from the animal and identified. Anthrax was the first disease demonstrated to meet these rules, which have since proved useful with many other infectious diseases and with chemical poisoning. However, for many diseases, both communicable and non-communicable, the aforementioned rules by Koch are inadequate. Many causes act together, and a single factor, such as smoking, may be the cause of multiple diseases. In addition, the causative organism may disappear when a disease has developed, making it impossible to demonstrate the organism in the sick person. 4 types of factors play a part in the causation of disease. All are necessary, but they are rarely sufficient to cause a particular disease or state. First, predisposing factors. such as age, sex, or specific genetic traits that may result in a poorly functioning immune system or slow metabolism of a toxic chemical. Previous illness may also create a state of susceptibility to a disease agent. There are enabling or disabling factors such as low income, poor nutrition, bad housing, and inadequate medical care, which may favor the development of a disease. Conversely, circumstances that assist in recovery from illness or in the maintenance of good health could also be called enabling factors. The social and economic determinants of health are just as important as the precipitating factors in designing prevention approaches. Precipitating factors such as exposure to a specific disease agent may be associated with the onset of disease, and reinforcing factors such as repeated exposure, environmental conditions, and unduly hard work may aggravate an established disease or injury. Okay, that brings us to about 21 minutes. We're going ahead and pause the recording here